Welcome to A Way Forward, the podcast where I sit down and have real discussions about the challenges we face in our cities, communities, and neighborhoods. The goal of this podcast is to create a space that includes expert interviews, guests with lived experiences, and voices not often heard. I'm your host, retired Police Chief Daniel Hahn, and I will bring my experience in law enforcement, community, and education to each conversation so that together we can build a way forward. I have Pastor Dr. Ephraim Smith, and I'm just going to say a few things about you because I want people to hear it from your mouth. But Pastor Smith is author of numerous books. Matter of fact, we've had a few talks about you authoring books. Graduate of St. John's University and Lutheran Theological Seminary, received an honorary doctorate ministry degree from Ashland Theological Seminary, and has a doctorate in ministry degree in addition to many other things, and is co-lead pastor of a church near and dear to my heart, but a very large, growing church, Midtown Church. So welcome, Pastor
Glad
Smith.
to be on this podcast. I listen. And so, I didn't know if I'd ever be invited, but, I was praying that I would be.
Oh, good. So I just want to start out. I forgot probably one of your most treasured identities, maybe a Minnesota Vikings fan.
I'm a huge Minnesota sports fan. So all Minnesota sports teams, but I'm a huge Vikings fan, which I know you tease me about because...
I did. I have a follow-up question to
this. Yes.
There was a Super Bowl where your Vikings lost to this team that wore silver and black. What team was that?
So all the way back in 1977, they lost to the then Oakland Raiders. And that's the last time the Minnesota Vikings have been in a Super Bowl. We've been in a number of NFC championship games since then, but for some reason, we just can't get back to the Super Bowl. And maybe because we're still recovering from
I think we beat
Jack
you
Tatum.
so bad.
Yeah, Jack Tatum hit wide receiver Sammy White so hard his helmet flew off.
The current receivers feel it. All right, so I think we've established you're from Minnesota, which is also near and dear to my heart because that's where my mom is from. So if you would, share a little bit about your upbringing and some of the things, lessons or memories of your upbringing that really are core to what you believe leadership-wise today and how you do the things that you do today.
So I, as you said, grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Some people say, well, what is Minnesota known for? I mean,
cold.
Cold. But, I grew up in the city of Prince and Morris Day and the Time, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, who produced, groups like the SOS Band, artists like Janet Jackson. And so one of the things that really shaped my leadership is being involved in the arts. I actually went to the high school that Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis went to, Jesse from the Time, went to. And so it was normal, to see artists come back to our school. I grew up around some of the guys in the band Mint Condition. And so I was involved in theater, music, sang in some music groups. So one of the things that really shaped my leadership, probably my confidence to communicate to people, was being involved in a performing arts program at Minneapolis North High School. The connection to theater and the performing arts really had an impact on me, but also the church of Minneapolis. That I grew up in a church called Redeemer Missionary Baptist Church, predominantly African-American, but was also influenced by United Methodist Church, Park Avenue Methodist, that was exclusively white at one time. The neighborhood changed when families like mine moved in. And so the story goes that for a number of years, if an African-American family went to attend Park Avenue United Methodist Church, they would be stopped by an usher that would say, "Oh, you must be looking for the Negro Baptist Church down the street." But eventually, they had a senior pastor named Phil Heinerman who wanted to embrace that diversity. And so he hired a youth pastor named Art Erickson, whose job was to be 50% working with kids in the church, 50% working with kids in the neighborhood. And that was like in the 1960s. And so there were like 300 people, they said, left the church over that.
Wow.
So then some of them that stayed said, hey, we got an idea. Why don't we rent out a community center, a room at a community center where the neighborhood youth can go there, and then our kids can
separate.
still, have youth group here. So they would separate the white kids of the church families from the neighborhood kids that were coming in. And Pastor Heinerman said, no, all of God's children are going to be in the same building. So then another 300 people, they say, left. So then you fast forward to the 1980s.
That couldn't have been easy for them.
Right. They lost a lot of people. So, but the beautiful thing is Pastor Heinerman stayed at that church long enough to go from all those people leaving to all of a sudden Park Avenue became a large multiracial, multi-ethnic church. So by the time I was involved in the youth group there in the 1980s, and then eventually I would become the youth pastor at that church. That church was about 1,800, so which is large for a center city urban church. And so Park Avenue United Methodist Church and their transition from an all-white church to a multiracial church, Redeemer Missionary Baptist Church, a predominantly African-American church, and my involvement in the arts shaped a lot of my leadership skills.
So I've heard this story from you before. I can't remember all the details, so I'm gonna ask it again, because as you probably know, I'm interested in history,
Yes.
and so you've told me the story about how your parents or your father, I think, came to Minnesota.
Yes.
Share that real quick, because that's part of your history of how you got to these institutions that you just mentioned.
Yeah. So both of my parents are from the segregated South. So my mom was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and then eventually my grandmother, her mother, as a single mother, moved to Minneapolis with some of her children at the time because she had a couple of brothers that had moved from the South. So, that migration, it starts earlier than this, but I mean in the 50s and the 60s, going into the 70s, migration of African Americans leaving the South into the North, but especially before the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, African Americans moved. So my mom, by the time she's going to middle school and high school, she's already in Minneapolis. She grew up in the neighborhood that Prince is actually, where he started, right? So, but my dad, he's from Monroe, Louisiana, or really a small parish outside of Monroe called Bosco. He grew up in Jim Crow, in the segregated South. He tells me stories of going to the movie theater for the first time, but because of segregation, he had to go through the back door and up some steps to the balcony, and they weren't allowed to go to the concession stand. There was no bathroom for them. So, you were in trouble if you had to go to the bathroom during the movie. You just have to go out and go outside or figure it out or hold it, until that Western was over, because the coloreds were not allowed to use the bathroom and they were not allowed to go to the concession stand. Right. They had to sit in the balcony. So my dad graduates high school, and then, he basically wants to get away from that. I mean, he grew up on a farm, on a cotton field, and so he graduates high school, has an uncle that lives in Chicago. So the plan is to go to Chicago. He heads to Chicago
for a better life, essentially.
Yes,
right?
trying to figure out life beyond working on a cotton field at the end of a dirt road in Bosco, Louisiana. Right. And as he's getting ready to head to Chicago, his uncle, my great uncle Wes, lets him know, hey, I'm moving to Minneapolis.
From Chicago.
Yeah. So my great uncle, had a job in Chicago, but now he's going to relocate to Minneapolis. So my dad makes his way to Minneapolis, and one of the first jobs he gets is basically he's handing out towels at the Minneapolis Athletic Club. So as wealthy, white businessmen, eventually, at first, the only African Americans that were able to go to the Minneapolis Athletic Club were athletes. So over time, a baseball player like Tony Oliva, or a baseball player like Rod Carew, or a football player like Chuck Foreman, Alan Page. They were allowed, because of their stature.
Right.
But it was mostly white men. My dad would hand them towels and, greet them as they were coming in to this exclusive, members only club. So one of the men that was a member there owned a company called H&B. They build elevator frames and they put the finish on elevator doors and they install elevators in buildings. And the man just happened to ask my dad, is this what you want to do the rest of your life?
Apparently he said no.
Right. My dad said, well, not really. And so the guy said, well, do you have a skill or a trait? What are you doing? Are you doing something else besides this? And my dad said, yeah, I'm going to school to get certified as a welder. The guy said, great. When you're done, you call me. And he gave my dad his card. Wow. My dad called him, and my dad was the first African-American hired at H&B. And it wasn't easy for him. There were some guys that, didn't really particularly like the fact that he was there, but he made his way through, and he worked there 45 years. So whenever I step up to an elevator, whether it's in a business complex or a hotel, an arena, when I go up to an elevator and I see that finish on the frame and I see that door, I think of my dad doing that for 45 years so I could go to college.
Yeah, I was at an event one time where one of the original Tuskegee Airmen was talking, and he mentioned this phrase, make sure your bags are packed, that he was told as a young man.
Yeah.
Meaning when opportunity comes, make sure you're prepared for it. Make sure you're ready for it, because the opportunity is going to come. And if you're not ready for it, it moves on to the next person. Sounds like your dad was ready for that unusual opportunity that came that really changed his professional life.
Yeah. So, I mean, so to take that chance to go to Chicago, then to Minneapolis, to take a job.
School.
Yeah. And, we're in a different generation now. Sometimes I talk to young people and they act like there's certain jobs that are a little beneath them.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I want to get a job, but I'm not gonna work
at $40 an hour.
Yeah, I ain't working at no Starbucks. I ain't working at no, like, you better, do you know that Starbucks has a program where they help employees go to school? Yeah. Like, you better take that Starbucks job. Or,
I just talked to a girl that played soccer with my daughter when they were younger. She works at Home Depot. She told me they have health insurance and everything at Home Depot.
Yeah, right.
I had no idea.
Right.
Like, man, that's pretty good.
And so I learned a lot from my dad, from my mom. My grandparents, my grandmother on my mom's side, was a domestic. So when I saw that movie The Help, with Viola Davis, you is kind, you is smart, you is important. I mean, that was what my grandmothers did.
Wow.
My grandmother in Louisiana, she worked in the cafeteria in the public schools. But my grandmother on my mom's side worked as a domestic, but then she turned that into, she created her own janitorial business. And she went from, cleaning the houses of families in Minneapolis to then creating her own company and getting contracts. So by the time I was in middle school and high school, I was working for my grandmother, where she had a contract to clean the traffic control tower at the airport. She had a contract at the Chicago Lake Diner. And so I would, get up at 4 a.m. and go and clean, the Chicago Lake Cafe to get it ready before they opened for breakfast at 6 a.m.
Just saying it makes it sound, almost makes it sound easy. I'm sure, especially back then, it was not easy for someone like your grandmother to break into being a business owner and all that.
Back then, I just didn't have the ability at that time. I just knew, that's what my grandmother does. Right. And I didn't appreciate it much. I mean, sometimes I didn't like getting up on, Saturday at 4 a.m. to go to clean, with her. But now I'm at an age where I was like, man, my grandmother as a black woman owned her own business.
Yeah.
And as a single woman with 6 kids, she owned her own home. Yeah. She owned a house. She raised 6 kids. She went from, being a domestic to owning her own janitorial business. Like now I can appreciate that at a level that unfortunately I didn't when I was younger.
So talk a little bit about when you were younger, like in high school, in performing arts and all that. Did you want to be a pastor back then, or at what point did you? Because you're so much more than just a pastor, but You are a pastor of a thriving church, co-lead pastor of a thriving church. At what point did you decide you wanted to be a pastor, and why? How did that come about?
I did not want to be a pastor. So, like a lot of urban African-American males, you first start out, you want to be an athlete. You know what I mean? So, but, that just didn't work out for me. Like I played parkboard football. I played parkboard. I should have kept running track because I was actually good at that. And I don't know why I didn't. I just, at the time, I just didn't have that kind of discipline to give myself to track the way I should have. Even though I eventually became a high school basketball coach, which is another story. But because by the time I was a freshman in high school, I realized I just wasn't as good as some of the other kids in my high school. So I was fortunate that I had a counselor that saw that I was good. And he remembered that I sang in the talent show or sang at church. And so he said, and my grades weren't that great my freshman year. And he said, look, there's a high school, Minneapolis North. It has a performing arts program. I've seen you on stage. I've seen you in talent shows. I've seen you at church. I think if you get involved in that, it's going to help you with your grades, but it's going to help you find yourself. So he talked to my parents. His name, not related to me, but he was a counselor named Ephraim Smith. Talked to my parents and talked them into letting me transfer across town to Minneapolis North. I got involved in the performing arts program. From there, I had a counselor named Fletcher Cooley, pulled me out of class my senior year and said, why haven't you filled out any applications for college? And before I could answer, he put 3 folders in front of me. He said, you're going to take these home, you're going to fill these out with your parents, you are going to college. That was back in the day where all the black people knew each other.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like my
deal.
counselor knew my parents, some of my teachers knew my parents, so right. It's like, Fletcher Cooley would say to me, man, your mom and dad are working too hard for you not to go to college. So that's how I ended up going to St. John's University on a scholarship. And, I wasn't an athlete, but I had decent enough grades and leadership skills that I received some scholarships, and I majored in theater and communications. That's what I thought I was going to do. I either wanted to be an actor or I wanted to be like on the news, like the news anchor person. So I majored in theater, communications. So I was doing studying journalism. I was writing for the student newspaper. I DJ'd at our college radio station. I was in plays, musicals. I was doing coffee shops. Like one of the ways I raised money because the scholarships didn't cover all my expenses. So I would set up my own coffee shop concerts on campus. Like I'd make up my own flyers. I would work with people in the theater department that did sound, and I would do concerts and sell tickets and do my own plays with people, sell tickets and get in talent shows, sing at weddings. So I thought I was going to do something in the arts, but every summer my youth pastor would hire me. I was always late to the game, and so I was like, I got 2 choices. I can either work for my grandmother this summer, mopping floors, sweeping, doing that, or my youth pastor would always call me and say, hey, why don't you work on staff here at Park Avenue Methodist Church? Because they would do summer camps. And so he'd say, use that theater stuff here. So I would develop skits, and I do little theater stuff with kids, and then I sang in some music groups, and so he would just hire me every summer. And so the summer before my senior year in college, he started talking to me about, what if you're supposed to use this for ministry? What if you're and I was like, no. And I was dating my wife at the time. She was like, these are the 3 people I'll never marry. I'll never marry a police officer. I'll never marry a fireman. I'll never marry a pastor. And I was like, you don't have to worry about me. But
that's funny on so many levels, being who one of your daughters is married to.
Yeah, so now I'm a pastor, and my oldest daughter is married to a police officer. So Danisha, I'm like, sorry, your husband's a pastor, your son-in-law is a police officer. And so so that just kept, getting to me. That Art Erickson, my youth pastor, just kept giving me these opportunities in church and kept staying in my ears. So my senior year, I had this experience my senior year in college where I went to my dorm And I thought it was just a regular day, changing books out of my backpack to get other books to get ready for another class. And while I was in my room, I just had this experience with God where I just fell on my knees and started crying. And I just had this experience where I knew that there was something different for me beyond. And I still dabbled a little bit in theater and film. I got one film credit to my name. I think it's still on Amazon Prime. You can watch it, where I play a homeless guy in a movie. But 32 years ago, I went to Danisha's grandfather, who was a pastor, and said, I think I might be called to ministry, but I'm not sure. This was back in 1991. And he looks at me and he says, well, we'll find out. And I was like, what does that mean? So I'm at church again with Danisha. Haven't told her about this experience I had.
Oh, boy.
And we're engaged now to be married. And she's thinking, I'm just going to graduate with this theater degree and I might be a starving actor, while we're trying to figure
pastor.
Out. Yeah. So we're in church and her grandfather, we're at her church. Her grandfather gets up and he says, a couple weeks ago, Brother Ephraim over there going to come up to me after church and said, I want to meet with you. Oh, and I said, why? And he said, I think I might be called to ministry. And Danisha's looking at me and he goes, so we're going to find out. 2 weeks from today at 4:30 in the afternoon, he's going to preach his first sermon. And after he's done, we're going to excuse him and then we're going to pray and we're going to ask God if he's called to ministry. I'm thinking to myself, I just wanted to have a conversation.
When Danisha stood up and walked out.
Well, I remember she started crying. And her mom came and put her arm around her, and I was just sitting there stunned,
Right.
And then
you
he
didn't
goes,
know that was happening.
And so then he starts preaching his sermon, and then Danisha's mom after church is talking to her. It's okay, baby, it's okay. I knew it. I knew he was a pastor, and her dad was talking to her. So she still married me. So, but
it's been a long time now.
So from there, and this was a small church, so. I preached that sermon. Pastor Barry, Rising Star Missionary Baptist Church, licensed me as a minister. And I graduated from college. Danisha and I got married. And I didn't get into full-time ministry right away.
Right.
As soon, because that church, most of the churches that I knew in Minneapolis, all the pastors were bivocational.
Right.
They pastored a church, but they worked at a school. They had jobs. So I was a minister. I graduated college. I took a job as an admissions counselor at St. John's University, did that for a year. And then I took a job at a Christian Boys and Girls Club called Hospitality House and worked there for 3 years, got involved in sports, coaching kids, and eventually I worked for Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I was the urban director. And so when I first started, I was volunteering as the youth minister at Redeemer Missionary Baptist Church. I was working for Fellowship of Christian Athletes and doing chaplain stuff for high schools, colleges. For a little while, Minnesota had an arena football team called the Minnesota Fighting Pike. It's a horrible name.
I don't think I remember that.
Horrible. Remember when arena football was big though?
Yeah.
So I remember when they played the Iowa Barnstormers and Kurt Warner was the quarterback. So I was the chaplain for
the Pike.
For the Minnesota Fighting Pike for a year. And then every once in a while I would get invited to maybe do a chapel for the Minnesota Vikings. I got to know during those years, I got to know Coach Dennis Green. I got to know Christian athletes like Chris Carter. I got to know Reggie White. So I did sports ministry.
Gotcha.
Until eventually I became a youth pastor and eventually a senior pastor.
So a way forward, the program is really about talking to people with real, both personal and professional experiences on how do we help make tomorrow better for all people. So as a pastor and somebody that has been involved in the church and religion in general for very, very long time, what do you think is the role of the church or the role of religion in general in helping make tomorrow better for all people? What do you think that role of religion and the church, regardless of what denomination or whatever somebody?
Well, ultimately, the role of religion, the role of the church is to help human beings connect to something beyond their humanity that will give them strength, that will give them some grounding for life beyond just their human might, their human intellect, that they would have faith in God. So faith in God, spiritual development, having grounding spiritually in a belief in God, something beyond your own humanity. That's first and foremost the role of the church. But I'm a product of the African American church. I'm a product of African American urban religion. And historically, African American religion rises out of slavery. Mm-hmm. And so that faith not only is about connecting to God, having a spiritual life, but it's also about how God comes to bear socially on suffering, on injustice, on evil. And so for me, I believe that religion, that the church is about connecting individuals in community to belief in God, the reality of God on a daily basis, but also what does it mean to bring that faith to bear on brokenness in the world?
Which brings me to my next question. You are not a stranger as a pastor. You know, there's people that love Pastor Smith, Little Rev, but you've also had people that I don't know how to put this the most accurately, but don't believe. I guess I'm assuming they don't believe that the church should dabble in, or when they go to church, there should be talk about some of the things that go on.
Yes,
like
yes.
In everyday life, out in the community. And you are somebody that always or often touches both, like intertwines the two.
Yes.
So how do you, what do you think the importance of that is, and how do you deal with the fact that, you know, people might think that, some people might call it politics, you bring politics into it, but like things that are happening in our world every day
Yes.
are things that you at times touch on in your sermons or in your talks.
Yeah. Well, some people see faith, and specifically talking about Christianity, but you could put this in any religion. Some people see it from an individual perspective, that ultimately when I come to church, I want a word about God, and I want to know how it applies to my individual life. So I want to go to church, and because some people see sin just from an individual standpoint. Like, you know, I'll acknowledge that there's sin, that there's brokenness in my heart, and I need to accept God in my life. I need faith to deal with, you know, maybe I'm selfish, you know, maybe I'm too stubborn. Maybe I have a hard time forgiving people when they offend me. So I want to come to church and hear a message about that. I want to be more generous. But some people don't see the church's role, the pastor's role, as also developing what I would call systemic sin. So when you read the Bible, yes, there's stories about individuals who are wicked, but there's also stories about systems and structures and empires and nations that are wicked. And so if somebody says to me, you know, I wish you wouldn't be so political, I would say, well, when you read the story of Moses and he's going to Pharaoh, a government leader, and saying, let my people go, how do you understand that story? That story's political to me.
Right.
Here's a guy going to the head of the government of Egypt, and he's demanding that Egypt, who's enslaving Hebrew people, pass a public policy to let them go.
Right.
You know, what put Daniel in the lion's den? The public policy of Babylon.
Yeah.
What put Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Let's get real prayer. What put Jesus on the cross? Well, people think, well, he went to the cross for our sins. But how did he?
Yeah, what was the system or process that got him there?
Jewish religious people didn't crucify people. the Jewish religious leaders had to go to Pontius Pilate and Herod. They had to go to the government of the Roman Empire to get them to participate in Jesus' death. Right. So crucifixion was something the government did. So Jesus dying on the cross it is spiritual. There's no doubt it's spiritual. It's no doubt it's religious, but it's political too. So I don't know how you tell these stories and apply them to life today and avoid having sermons be political on some level.
Right.
And I think what the real issue is for, and I'll get real specific, for some of my white brothers and sisters to come to church and to have to sit through a message that might say you are complicit in some of the systemic brokenness in our world, and God calls you to do something about that. That's a lot for some people. And so I get why initially, I remember getting an email on one of my first sermons at Midtown Church. I got an email from a woman. She wasn't white, but her husband's white. And her email was something like this: I was so hurt and in tears after your sermon. My husband had to sit through a 30-minute sermon and be called a racist for 30 minutes. And I was thinking to myself, first of all, I don't know your husband. I don't remember anywhere in this sermon mentioning your husband or calling him a racist for 30 minutes. But the fact that that was around the time that Stephon Clark died, which you're very close to. Yes. I mean, you had to endure that in a very direct way. Later it would be the George Floyd thing. Right. That just for some people, just me saying George Floyd died on the block that I grew up on in Minneapolis, and talk about some of the history of policing in a way that is racial in nature, to her and her husband, that was me calling her husband a racist for 30 minutes. And so I haven't figured out how to solve that dilemma fully, because I don't want that to be a white brother or sister's experience in my sermon. You know what I mean? So I am still growing, developing, but I'm not going to avoid it. I'm not going to not talk about systemic sin and what I believe is God's solution to it. But I think I can always get better as a communicator, as a preacher, as a pastor, because I pastor a multiracial church, and I want to shepherd and love and challenge and push. I mean, I want to push the African Americans. I hope that you on a Sunday feel challenged by me. I mean, at some point, I hope you don't feel like, that I just called Daniel Hahn a sexist for 30 minutes. You know what I mean?
Right. So kind of related to my first question, as Midtown Church is involved in so many things other than just, and I don't mean to say just like it's minimizing it, but sermons on Sunday, yes. Church service on Sunday. Midtown has been part of, you mentioned Stephon Clark, has been part of unity marches with the community, with the police department, to try to bring people together and again, make tomorrow better. You offer through the church, sometimes you're leading it, sometimes other people are leading it, numerous programs outside of Sunday services.
Yes.
Whether it's exploring Martin Luther King's book or other classes that you hold at night for members and non-members. Why do you, as one of the leaders of that church, feel that is the role of the church? Like, what is your goals for doing things in addition to traditional Sunday service?
Well, our desire at Midtown Church is that people from our congregation would be part of the solutions to the systemic and social ills, and that through their involvement in these issues, that's a witness to who Jesus is, to who God is. Like, I get it. In America, there are some churches, some pastors, some Christians that take the approach of, I'm just going to preach to you, and I'm just going to tell you what sin is, and I'm going to tell you you're a sinner, and I'm going to tell you you need to get saved. And,
you go figure out the rest.
Yeah, there's a time and place for that, right? But I think one of the ways that people will know that God is real and that Christianity is legit is by their interaction with Christians. So if Christians are compassionate, if Christians are bridge builders, if Christians are generous and forgiving and loving and justice oriented in a world that is deeply polarized by politics and by race and by so many issues, that I believe that's a witness. And again, I didn't make this up. I mean, there's scriptures that talk about, you fed the hungry, you gave drink to the thirsty, you visited the sick, you visited the incarcerated, you clothed the naked.
Right.
And so I think at Midtown, we're just trying to figure out tangible, practical ways to live out the scriptures that we read, that we preach about. We don't want to just proclaim it. We want to perform it. We don't want to just declare it. We want to demonstrate it.
Good. So I must say, in my past life, when I was police chief, Midtown often helped. I was always told by the leaders of Midtown, you and others, that if you or the officers came across somebody that needed help, food, any number of things, call us. And I did call y'all a couple times, and every time people would receive if they were in desperate need of food, like their family didn't have anything to eat or something, people from Midtown would show up later that day with bags of groceries. So
yes.
I just say that to say that what you're saying isn't just talk. You actually do.
And it's what I grew up in. I mean, I referred to that church, Park Avenue United Methodist Church. And so I'm fortunate that I was trained and mentored in what I would call a holistic understanding of ministry of the church, that the church is not just Sunday morning. That the church shouldn't just be a worship center, it should be a community transformation center. So when I mentioned being a part of Park Avenue, when I was in the youth group, but when I was on staff there, Park Avenue United Methodist Church had a thrift store, a free health clinic, a free legal clinic, a tutoring program. Eventually, it had a separate nonprofit called the Park Avenue Community Foundation that ran a lot of these programs, transitional housing. And I served as the executive director of the Park Avenue Foundation for a while. When I was pastoring Sanctuary Covenant Church in North Minneapolis, we also had the Sanctuary Community Development Corporation, and we focused on reducing youth violence. We worked developing after-school programs and tutoring programs. So when I met Bob Ballion, and I was eventually asked to come on staff to co-pastor with him, and I saw what Midtown was doing, that was right up my alley. I mean, so what Midtown Church does, it's what I experienced from the church as a kid myself. It's what my experience was on staff of churches. I mean, Redeemer Missionary Baptist Church, tutoring program, co-op store. So I was trained that the church should be in the work of community development and civic engagement.
So to close this out today, I think you have a unique experience in a community, like most pastors have probably somewhat similar experiences, in that, you deal with families and individuals at times at their worst moments, right? They've had a tragedy or they've lost a loved one. You officiate funerals. You also interact with families and people at their best. You officiate weddings and the gamut of emotions and challenges and great things that we all go through in our lives. And from a perspective of a pastor and a church, in regards to the challenges that we have in society, I know this is a large question, but you deal across the spectrum, from communities that are in poverty to communities that are well off. What would you like to think of that we all should be thinking about of how do we make tomorrow better for all people? Like when you deal with families, what do you think are the things that people in challenging situations or like need the most from us as a society? Like if we're thinking like, especially through the church, how can we be the most good for making tomorrow better for all people?
Yeah, I would say, especially in the time that we're in now. I mean, again, we're for a few years now. We've been very deeply polarized by politics, by race, by religion, so many things. And so, one, I think I would encourage people to truly listen to others that are different than you and not just come to the table prepared to defend your position. So, I was on the board for a few years here, served as board president for Sacramento ACT, which is a faith-based community organizing movement, very ecumenical. And one of the blessings of that is it gave me the opportunity to just be around the table, be in rooms with people different than me, imams, rabbis, people that representing the Sikh religion. And I could just be in the room and just listen and just receive and respect and honor those folks. And, sit in those rooms didn't uproot me from my Christian heritage. I wasn't threatened by that. It was a blessing. For me, you helped me tremendously when you were police chief and I was, struggling through just my own issues and watching the video of George Floyd die on the block that I grew up on.
Which probably wasn't the only video you've seen of police activity, right? It's just the end of a long line of other videos.
Or my personal experiences.
Right.
But I had to reconcile, how could I speak to those issues? And I have the police chief in my church, but eventually I have a son-in-law who's white, who's a police officer in a suburb of Chicago now. And I love him dearly. And so, even you, in that moment, you invited me and some pastors to the academy where officers are trained.
That was a funny story.
And I had
you were done wrong that day, by the way. I want you to know.
Yeah, you invited me to be in this seminar. I think I was set up from the beginning.
You were set up. Yes.
But what I do want to say is that's what has to happen. You have to be able to build friendships, relationships, listen to people that are different than you. Seek ways in which you can be generous and compassionate. While people are burning bridges and demonizing people, we need people that will build bridges and will actually acknowledge the humanity of people, even if they don't vote like you, didn't grow up the way you did, would not come with the perspective that you have. So if we could listen, if we could be humble, if we could be more compassionate, and also wrestle with the injustices and the divides and figure out how we can use our gifts to be a solution. We need people of faith and people of goodwill like never before right now.
Yes. I have to say, you mentioned, listening to other people and coming together. That story you talked about coming to the academy.
Yes.
I think you were fairly new to Sacramento at the time.
I was.
And so there was you and probably 6 or 7 other pastors, not all from Midtown, from different churches. And you were set up, not by me, I want to add, but they all said, because you were the rookie, you were the volunteer in the simulation machine.
Yes.
And, but to your point, here's several pastors who I'm sure most, if not all, were wrestling with the same things you just mentioned you were wrestling with. How do we deal with law enforcement in certain communities and just the George Floyd, all these things that, a lot of times we're still dealing with to this day on how do we navigate all that. Yet you still showed up. Yet you still went to the police academy. That I'm sure some people wouldn't agree with doing that. Like, why are you doing that? They're all evil and all. And you still went through the simulation machine. Now, I will add to most people, as part of the simulation machine, at some point you have to shoot. And your shooting was all in a small area, probably not more than an inch or two apart, all the rounds you shot. So I think you've left something out of your background. I think you were a Navy SEAL or a secret agent or something. I don't know how you, I've never shot that good in my life.
Not too long ago, I was going to ask you to take me to the gun range, but maybe I don't need that.
I don't think you need it. Last, to close this out today, if somebody today has, listening, has been inspired by some of the things that you say and wants to get involved or just check out Midtown Church, what would be, how should they go about doing that? What would you recommend they do if something you said today has sparked there? And hey, I'd like to check that out.
Well, if you're in the Sacramento area, I definitely invite you to, we're on the corner of 19th and V here in Sacramento, and we have services at 8:30, 10:30, 12:30 on Sundays. And so we would love to invite you out to experience us. But if you're out of the Sacramento area, or you already have a church home and you just want to get a little sneak preview of us, you can go to our YouTube channel. So Midtown Church of Sacramento, we're on YouTube. We have a podcast wherever you can get your podcasts. And we also have a website, midtownchurch.org, midtownchurch.org. You can follow us on social media and check us out.
And being somebody that goes to that church, I can tell you it's a very diverse church with numerous different experiences, people that don't agree with each other, people that do agree with each other. So it's a good place to do some of the things that you have talked about today. So with that, I just thank you for your time today, and thank you more importantly for the care and feeding and collaboration that you live every day as co-lead pastor of Midtown, and all the things that Midtown does for the betterment of people, not always members of the church, just the community at large. So thank you for doing that every day. Appreciate what you do for our community.
Thank you so much. And may God make it that the Raiders and Vikings meet in the Super Bowl again, but a different outcome when that happens.
Like a redemption tour? I fear that it would be the same outcome, and that it would add to your trauma, and I don't want to do that. And maybe next time we talk, we can talk about the story of being a father of two daughters like myself, what you did to your son-in-law.
Oh my gosh,
at lunch. As a matter of fact, we got a few minutes. Why don't you tell that story of what you did? And I will add, before you even tell this story, that he is your son-in-law. He wasn't your son-in-law at the time.
Right.
He was your prospective son-in-law at the time.
That's right.
And he still became your son-in-law. So as people are listening to this, don't feel like this was some evil thing. He still became your son-in-law, and is still your son-in-law to this day.
So my oldest daughter, Jada, I'm going to give a shout out. Her stage name is Jada Levon. So my oldest daughter is an actress. And
she's doing what you wanted to do.
Yes, she actually did what I thought I was going to do. My oldest daughter, she has a bachelor's in theater and film, a master's in theater and film. She teaches theater, and she's a professional actress. So she meets Josiah in undergrad. He happens to be white, but he was so determined, he joined the Black Student Union so he could ask her out. So I realized, when they're both seniors, this is pretty serious, this relationship. So
she hasn't dumped him yet.
Right. So they're going out. So she lets me know, hey, Josiah's gonna come to town. I want you guys to meet him because things are really serious between us. So I'm meeting him for the first time. So I just tell him, hey, I would love to take you to lunch and get to know you. But I didn't tell him. He was majoring in criminal justice. I knew he wanted to be a police officer. And you're a police chief at the time. So I didn't tell him. He thought he was just going to lunch with me. But when we get to the restaurant, you're sitting there.
I don't even know if I do that to my own daughter.
You're sitting there in uniform. The founding pastor of Midtown Church, Bob Ballion's there. Jay King from the California Black Chamber of Commerce is there.
And another gentleman.
And a brother that used to be the mayor of Berkeley, who knew Malcolm X. It was there. So I'm like, I got this group, and y'all are just sitting there all serious. And I bring Josiah there, and man, y'all grilled him pretty good. But you were the one. I know we got to close, but I remember you gave him your card.
I was in full uniform too.
Yes, you gave him your card and you said, I heard you want to be a police officer. When you graduate, give me a call. And then you said, but if you disrespect my pastor's daughter, I'll find you. And there'll be nowhere you can go. Because I know people all around the country.
And he's still
FBI,
your son-in-law.
Yes, he's still my son-in-law. So I give him credit that he got through the hazing. And
I'm not sure if that's worse or the whole Martin Lawrence, Will Smith scene. I'm not sure which one is worse. But anyway, thank you again, Pastor Smith. Appreciate your time and what you do for our community. Appreciate it.
Honored to be here.